This is going to be a quick video explaining how you would use Glaze to manually and automatically replace one ingredient from a recipe with another similar but different ingredient. This has come about because I want to change one of the ingredients in my first 5 set of glazes. As some of you might already know, the first 5 project is something I've been doing for a few years. The idea was to pick 5 generic, easily available and broad ingredients to use as bases for a wide variety of recipes. So these recipes all use 5 ingredients, maybe with 1 extra, but generally the same 5 in all of the bases, and then just use different colorants and use those ingredients in different proportions to create a wide range of different glazes, using the smallest amount of ingredients to buy at the start, making it as easy as possible to get into glaze making, because it can be quite intimidating when you begin. Really happy with how the project's worked. A lot of people have tried these glazes in a lot of different countries. They generally travel really well and they're getting similar results to me, and I'm happy with the results that I was getting with them. So overall, huge success. Really enjoyed the project and I'm glad it's helped so many people. The problem that I have at the moment is that 3134 is a specific branded product made by the Ferrofrit company in America, or the company's based in America, and it has to be imported into the UK and into Europe, and we are currently seeming to be at the start of a trade war. So a lot of people do not want to import ingredients if they can avoid it. And the good news is that there is a replacement for Ferrofrit that is made in the UK and in the EU, which is standard borax frit. Now, it is not identical, so you can't do a one-to-one swap, but it's very close and it is a suitable replacement. Quickly explaining what these mean, what I've done is I put the frit in at 100% for each of these, what would be typically a glaze recipe. And to explain this, here you've got your fluxes, different colors for alkaline metal and alkaline earth fluxes, and shown below is the ratio of them. Then in this column you have your alumina and your boron, and here you've got your silica. Now these are all expressed in proportion to the fluxes, so the fluxes add up to 1, and then these are relative to the fluxes, and the fluxes are in a ratio. I know this probably doesn't make sense if you don't understand this, and I will explain the whole thing at the end, but for now the important thing is to understand that these numbers all represent characteristics of the chemistry of a glaze, and that the numbers refer to the overall chemistry. These numbers are affected by the ingredients and the proportion that they're in. The specific chemistry of a glaze will affect its behavior, and within reason you can chemically match a glaze with other ingredients and get a similar result if all the underlying chemistry ends up being the same. There are limits to that, but generally speaking that's how it works. So fluxes, alumina, boron, silica, ratio of the fluxes, the ratio of silica to alumina. And here you can see that they have somewhat similar flux ratios. This one is closer to the 0.3, 0.7 that I generally aim for, which is nice. This one's a little bit further away. Not a big deal, but has to be accounted for. Similar amounts of boron relative to the fluxes, which is good, but this one has a lot more alumina and a bit more silica. 3134 does not really have much alumina at all, and this has some, so that has to be accounted for as well. If you wanted to adjust, I'm going to use the floating base, one of the most widely used of these recipes. You can see there, that's all the revisions that people have saved, and I know this is quite a popular one. What you want to do is make a copy of it, and you can now adjust the recipe, and this one will show you the original chemistry over here and the chemistry for the changes you make over here. So we're going to change our 3134 for standard borax, and as you can see the numbers have moved around a bit and the position on the map has moved around a bit. This one is further down the map, as in has less silica, less alumina, as you would expect, because 3134 has less of those. We've got slightly less boron in this one, and the flux ratio has changed. Now I'll explain how I work through changing a recipe when I'm doing it manually, and I generally do it manually. I like target and solve But I find it really quite satisfying to adjust a recipe by hand. I might be weird. You might also find the same thing. Just quite satisfying. But there's a sequence to it. And the reason for the sequence I will explain a bit later in the kind of boring chemistry part. You don't need to understand it to understand this, though. You want to set your flux ratio. That's the first thing to do. So you adjust your fluxes. And again, I'll explain which ingredient does what later. But for here, just it's important to know that nepheline cyanide essentially does the red and whiting does the blue. So that's your alkaline metal fluxes, alkaline earth fluxes. They're not very varied in this. And it's just those two with standard borax altering it slightly because it doesn't have that 0.3 to 0.7 ratio. We want to bring that number down slightly or bring that number up slightly. So let's take whiting and we'll just move that up until blue number goes up to 0.7 and then red comes down. So you can click in the box and use your arrow keys to bring it up and down, or you can type a new number in there. We've got our 0.3 to 0.7. That might shift a bit when we increase the boron, which we do by adjusting the frit. We might have to come back and readjust the whiting, but we're quite a way off the boron, so I'm going to jump straight to 30. Nope, 35. That's close. So up a little bit more, and we should get to 0.3 boron, and as expected, it's moved our flux ratio. So again, the red is too high. The red is nepheline cyanide. The blue is too low. That's whiting. In this case, let's bring Neph side down a bit. We've got our 0.3 to 0.7. We've got our 0.3 boron. You can see the alumina is actually pretty close, and the silica is down a little bit. The next thing to change is always alumina. So we want to bring that and you adjust the alumina by adjusting your clay source. So in this case, I've used kaolin. That's just a generic clay. It's put in as EPK. That's a specific brand of kaolin. I use what's called China clay in the UK. Same thing. We've got our alumina right. Our silica's a little bit low, and silica is, as you would expect, adjusted by silica. And you can just bump that up until we're aiming for 3.79. We're pretty close. That would do. Now, that adds up to 122.8%. That's no good. It's got to add up to 104.5%. Just explain that quickly. The base is these 5 ingredients. That adds up to 100%. The plus shows that these are additions to that base. And this is where you generally stick your colorants and anything else gets added to it, which is what that add stands for. So when we click 100%, that will take the recipe to 100%. It won't affect the additives because they've got that ticked. So now we have a glaze recipe that matches that one with the new frit. Now, the nice thing is that the chemistry doesn't have to be perfect. One thing you might have noticed if you've used my first 5 recipes is that I like all the ingredients to be in 2.5% increments. It makes them scale so much more easily. Ideally, I like them to be in 5% increments where possible, so that when you ask for 2.5 kilos or 3 kilos or whatever amount of a glaze recipe and it scales up, you get a nice round number that's easy to hit. When you've got a recipe that has 32.12% and you go for 2.5 kilos, you end up with a really awkward number. Now, obviously, the amount of effort required to put in that amount of material is essentially the same, whether it's rounded, putting in 487.38 grams isn't that much more work than putting in 500. But when you're trying to mentally process a recipe, having them be nice round numbers really does make a difference. So what I would do at this stage is I would take everything to its nearest 2.5%. So we're going to go 32.5, 32.5, 15, 10, 10. So now you've got nice round numbers, and that has moved the chemistry fractionally. It is close enough that I would be happy with that chemistry, and I like the percentages that will be an easy recipe to weigh out, and it should behave the same. I'll show you the target and solve. So target and solve is, I believe, a premium feature if you're a patron of Glazy. I'm a patron of Glazy because I love Glazy, and I would not have got into glaze making the way that I did without it. I think it is a wonderful resource, and we are very lucky to have it. I think Derek does great work with it. The amount of features it had when I started using it and that he's added since then are just ridiculous, and I can't believe that most people get it for free. I'm happy to pay money to keep it going, and one of the upsides is that I get target and solve if I want it. So to explain how this works, if you have access to it, you can lock your ingredients. You don't have to, and lock those two, because it removes the additional part, and it always takes the bentonite out given a chance. So if you lock those two, then you change your ingredient, and then but solve for these. So this, what's it going to try and match? So you don't have to ask it to match all of them. If you just wanted it to figure out the most important thing was matching the amount of boron, you could untick all the others and leave that on. You can have add generic materials, which I wouldn't generally use because that means it starts adding things in very small amounts to try and bring the chemistry perfectly to match all the trace things that might have come in. I mean, very useful if you really wanted it to match 100% perfectly, but it does make the recipe messier. Whereas doing this and clicking solve and rounding to it, going to 100% and rounding, and you see you're pretty much where we were. I'd have to check back. I should have left it open. I think that's exactly where we were before I started moving the numbers around manually. I mean, as you can see here, I think actually I can change the numbers. So let's say I put that to 40. Then it shows you've got too much boron, too little silica, alumina, and titanium. So if it can't hit the numbers, it will tell you down here if it hasn't quite got them. But this one is so perfect that it has nothing that it thinks is out. It's happy with all of those, and I would be very happy with that too. So that is a perfect chemistry match. The one that I will post is not a perfect chemistry match, but what I went with was what I showed you a second ago, 32.5, 32.5, 15, 10, 10. It's working perfectly. And so I've done a few variations. You've got the iron one, that's with flux on the rim, cobalt, chrome, copper, and rutile. So you've got your yellow, your green, your blue, your kind of dark chrome green, deep brown that breaks orange with the flux. And a new thing that I have just started doing is using the glossy base with 10% zircon. Makes great cover glaze. Now I've used it before with the oil spots, because again they bubble up. To really get the effect you need an opaque cover glaze, but I hadn't tried it on the floating glazes. Turns out works really well. They bubble up through it as well. You get a really nice pattern. Both glazes, well, one glaze is flowy enough, one glaze is stiff and opaque enough they don't blend together. Instead they produce that pattern. You can also use the glossy, the gloss clear is a high boron flowy glaze. The gloss base is a less runny, more solid, thicker glaze. That one's designed to be maximally clear, so it's got higher boron. Applied thinly, you get a really nice gloss, transparent glaze. But the two of them can be used over the top of the floating bases. The gloss clear makes it flow like that, and you can kind of see it in that test tile as well. Whereas the gloss base, particularly with an opacifier in it, produces that effect. The standard borax frit is working perfectly as a replacement. You can basically hit any of the first 5 glazes by sticking the standard borax frit in. So if there's one that I haven't done yet and you want to give it a go, you can do it using that technique that I just showed you, working through and adjusting it yourself. And if you are just getting into glaze making and you're in the UK or EU, go for the Freedom 5 glazes. And I have updated the blog post with new links to materials and all the new recipes. So let's explain what each ingredient is doing. First, I want to interrupt this scheduled broadcast to say thank you to Treats for sending me a box of Polish snacks to try. You might remember Treats from one of my previous videos where I interspersed, I think I was testing the different mixer designs with tasting their delicious treats. I had a similar thing planned for a video explaining how to make and use slip, but I am dawdling over that video because, as anyone who has made and used slip knows, it is a messy and laborious process, and so I thought I'd better try the treats while they were still fresh. I can't let them sit around in the studio for as long as it's going to take me to get around to making the video. So they've gone in this video, and I have been eating them while recording this. This box that I got is from Poland, although you can get them from all around the world. They have a mix of sweet and savoury snacks. In this particular box, there's lots of chocolate-coated wafer biscuit type things, which I particularly love, which is quite fortunate. I don't know if they're a particular delicacy in Poland, but this box had a few different flavours and different variations, of which I enjoyed all of them. I love trying new treats, so getting a box of a variety of things that you can't get in this country and having the opportunity to sample them and share them with family and friends is a lot of fun, and I appreciate that Treats have sent me a second box. If you want more details about where to find them, I'll put all the relevant links in the description, as well as a discount code for 15% off your first box of them. Now, I kind of rushed through it a little bit, why you work through the ingredients in the order that you do. As I said, you've got your two types of fluxes: alkaline metals, alkaline earth fluxes. They can be a variety of different things, but here we're using nepheline cyanide, which is a feldspathoid, so it's like a feldspar but not quite, and that's just a chemical distinction. They're broadly speaking doing the same thing in our glaze, but they bring a lot of different stuff. Not only do they bring the alkaline metal fluxes, they also have alumina and silica and possibly other contaminants. So adjusting the Nef psi, in fact if we take it out, you'll see the silica and alumina drop, and if you increase it, its position on the map changes. That's because not only is it adjusting the flux and the flux ratio, it is also bringing more alumina and more silica. Meaning that if you got everything else in proportion first and then adjusted the Nef psi, it would change all the other parts of it. So not only do you need to set your fluxes first, because everything's in relation to that, it's good to get your Nef psi or your feldspar at the correct proportion to begin with, and then you can adjust the silica and alumina later using silica and kaolin. So we set those to where we want them. Whiting just brings in calcium to our glaze, but there are some alkaline earth sources that will also bring in other things like silica. Talc brings in silica, magnesium silicate, and wollastonite is calcium silicate. So those will bring in silica. So again, getting these right at the start and then adjusting the silica later is much easier than trying to adjust these at the end and then having to go back and you jiggle different bits. So we start with, in fact, tell you what, we'll start with a new recipe. So if you were building one from scratch, what I would do is you add your Nef psi, say 30%. You add your whiting, 15%. That gives you an approximately correct flux ratio. As a general rule, half the amount of whiting Nef psi, you get pretty close to 0.3 to 0.7. Then you'd add your frit. Now, depending on what you're aiming for, 0.15 boron will give you a well-melted but not particularly runny glaze at cone 6. If you wanted a more flowing glaze, you'd have to bring that up. You can go probably as high as 0.3, maybe even a little bit higher. Too much boron, the glaze will be overfired. Let's say we'll keep it at that for now, 0.23. And now we need to balance those. So we will take that to 17.5, hits it perfectly, 0.2 boron, that's fine. So if we said we were making just a generic, well actually, if we were making a generic matte, you could probably just add the remaining 22.5 as kaolin, and now you're up there in the matte region, and that would be a generic, probably quite well melted, might craze a little bit matte, but yeah, that would work. But what you could do is do 10% kaolin, and then you would add your silica. And the reason that we do it in this way is, as mentioned, those two balance. That one might throw those two out, but it gets your boron pretty close. Then you adjust those. Once those three are in proportion, these two do not affect those. So you will keep your 0.3 and your 0.21 boron. So you've got your ratio, you've got your boron. However much kaolin you add and however much silica, you could do no kaolin and all silica and you're there, or you can do the reverse, but those numbers do not change. But kaolin brings silica with it. So if we take that to 0, you'll see it's down here, 1.5 rather, or 1.48. And then as we add kaolin, the silica increases, because kaolin is our main source of alumina, but it actually brings with it more silica than it does alumina. You might have noticed that these scales aren't the same. That goes from 1 to 7. That goes from 0.1 to 0.9. So kaolin actually brings in more silica than it does alumina, but we use it as an alumina source. So it's important to get your alumina right, which in this case, we'll say we want that to be 0.34. That's a nice amount. I mean, that's going to be a little low, but this isn't a real glaze. 0.34, and then you brought your silica up. So realistically, I don't like its position on the map. Maybe I should have planned this one a bit better. But you get the idea. Nepheline syenite and whiting affect everything, because they're fluxes, everything's in proportion to the fluxes. So you'll see if I drop this number, the position on the map changes. That's not because the amount of any of the other ingredients has changed, but their proportion relative to the fluxes has changed because the amount of flux has changed. That's why you set them first and keep them. Then your frit will affect those slightly, but you tweak the three of those. You've got to do kaolin next, because kaolin will affect silica. Silica only affects silica. So as I increase the silica, the only thing that changes is silica. Obviously, I've gone for nice round numbers here, but you could just do that and you've got a viable glaze there. 24, 14, 24, 14, 24. I realised that was not the most coherent explanation. Maybe I should plan that one a bit better in future. I think that pretty much does it. I think maybe that second half won't have made that much sense, but hopefully you understand the logic in why you would adjust things in the order that you do and what affects what. If you were taking a recipe, this one looks nice, and you see the changes that happen, and you can just, so again, Nef Psi, that's responsible for the red numbers. The red numbers are too high. You bring the red numbers down until the red and blue numbers are in the balance that you want. You look at your other numbers. Boron's fine, alumina's fine, so we can work through. We don't need to adjust the boron source. In this case, it's the borate. We don't need to adjust the kaolin, because that's fine. The only thing that's different between the two is the silica is off. So then you adjust the silica, and before you know it, you swapped an ingredient, you've got the same chemistry, and it should look pretty similar. Won't always work exactly. You do need to test these things. Different ingredients behave different ways, but that should be a pretty good approximation of that. And yeah, you just work through in that sequence. Adjust the fluxes until you're happy with them, adjust the boron, readjust the fluxes, adjust the alumina, adjust the silica, or use target and solve and get Glazy to do it for you. And finally, try to avoid trade wars when they're not necessary, I suppose.